Sisimulan natin ang module by defining what an identity is. So, paano natin masasabi kung may identity tayo? So, let us ask the question, what is an identity? Kapag sinabi nating identity ang isang equation, dapat true siya for all possible values. Kahit anong value ang isubstitute natin sa equation niyan, magiging true. That's how we know if it's an identity. So let's take a look at this example. So this equation, x squared minus 4 equals the product of x plus 2 and x minus 2. This is an example of an identity. Now, verify natin siya by letting x equals 1. So isa-substitute natin siya dun sa equation. And we have 1 squared minus 4 equals the product of 1 plus 2 and 1 minus 2. So, ito yun. Now, you're already familiar with how to simplify this one. And you should be able to arrive at negative 3 equals negative 3. So, we end up with negative 3 equals negative 3. As you can see, yung kaliwang side ng equation, tsaka yung kanang side ng equation ay equal. Therefore, yung equation natin ay true for x equals 1. Now, na-verify na natin siya for x equals 1. Ang problema, kailangan mapatunayan natin siya na true siya for all possible values of x. So, lahat ng pwedeng values ng x na real number. And that's impossible kung magsasubstitute ka na magsasubstitute. Pero may paraan tayo. Balikan natin yung ating equation na given. Yung equation natin na given na ito. If you'd notice, yung right side ng equation, product of x plus 2 and x minus 2. If you would recall your factoring, this is actually expandable. If you expand this one, you should end up with x squared minus 4. This is the difference of two squares. So, since we expanded it using the difference of two squares, we ended up with the right side and the left side equal. Saka lang natin masasabi na identity yan. However, for this module, ang focus natin ay fundamental trigonometric identities. Now, for this module, you are expected to do the following. First, identify the fundamental trigonometric identities. And second, apply the fundamental trigonometric identities in simplifying trigonometric expressions. So let's start with the fundamental trigonometric identities. First off, when we say trigonometric identities, simple lang, trigonometric identities kasi may trig ratios na involved. Ganun lang. Kaya natin siya tinawag na trigonometric identities kasi may trig ratios na involved. And yung sinasabi natin kanina na fundamental trigonometric identities, yun ang ating focus. Meron tayong tatlong klase ng fundamental trigonometric identities. We have reciprocal identities, we have ratio or quotient identities, and we have Pythagorean identities. Isa-isahin natin yan sila. Unahin natin ang reciprocal identities. So from the term itself, may involved na reciprocals ang set of identities na ito. Recall natin, pag sinabi natin reciprocal, let's say given any fraction, let's say 2/3. Para makuha natin yung reciprocal na yan, pinagpapalit lang natin si numerator and denominator. So yung 2 na numerator, magiging 2 sa denominator. Yung 3 naman na denominator, magiging numerator. So, yung 2/3, ang reciprocal niya ay 3/2. Alright? So, let us see here dito sa ating trigonometric ratios. Let's say we have sine theta. And the definition of sine theta is equal to y. Tama? Now, let us take the reciprocal of that y. That is 1 over y, diba? And yung definition ng 1 over y sa module 1, that is cosecant theta. Yung y dito, can actually substitute this here. Yung 1 over y. Yung y, pwede nating isubstitute ng sign. Kaya makuha natin itong identity na to. That is cosecant theta equals 1 over sine theta. Similarly, ganun lang din dun sa una. So, magkapares dyan, si sine at si cosecant. So, that's our first pair of reciprocal identities. Yung pangalawa, ganun din. But instead of sine, we're going to use cosine. Si cosine theta, that's equal to x. Usual lang yan, paulit-ulit lang. Ang reciprocal ni x ay si 1 over x, which is actually secant. Pag sinubstitute natin yung x dito, we end up with secant theta equals 1 over cosine. So, ang next pair natin, si cosine at si secant. So, yun yung reciprocal identities natin. No? On the other hand, meron tayong cosine theta equals 1 over secant theta, and we have secant theta equals 1 over cosine theta. Magka-partner yan siya. And for a third pair, mas masaya. Let's have tangent theta. Si tangent theta is defined as y over x. Tama? Then let us get the reciprocal. Reciprocal ni y over x, si x over y, which is just cotangent. So, pag sinubstitute natin yan dyan, we end up with cotangent theta equals 1 over tangent. And also, tangent theta is equal to 1 over cotangent theta. So, those are your reciprocal identities. The second group of fundamental identities is the ratio or quotient identities. Now, tinawag siyang ratio because it is the quotient of two different trigonometric ratios. Paano natin makukuha? First, let's have this one. Let us have the definition of tangent theta from the previous module. So, kung matatandaan ang nasa karaan nating module, tangent theta is equal to y over x. Also, dun sa definitions na yan, pwede natin makuha si y tsaka si x, right? Remember, yung sine theta natin, that is equal to y, and yung cosine theta natin, that is equal to x. We can simply substitute our y here. Yung y natin dito, isa-substitute natin si sine. Yung x dito, masa-substitute si cosine. So, therefore, yung una, makukuha natin si tangent theta equals sine theta over cosine theta. How about the other one? Pareho lang naman yan. But instead of tangent, we get cotangent. So, cotangent theta, balik tayo sa definition. That is equal to x over y. Yung x over y na yan, pwede mo ulit gamitin si sine tsaka si cosine. If we're going to substitute it to our cotangent theta, then we have the second ratio identity. That's cotangent theta equals cosine theta over sine theta. And the third one, yung Pythagorean identities. Yung Pythagorean identities, I'm going to show the three of them. So you have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. 1 plus cotangent squared theta equals cosecant squared theta. And tangent squared theta plus 1 equals secant squared theta. Now, on the next slide, papakita ko sa inyo kung paano natin nabuo yung identities na yan. Let us prove the Pythagorean identities mula sa equation ng ating unit circle. yung unit circle natin, that's x squared plus y squared equals 1. Gusto nyo i-verify? Balikan natin yung first module. And again, gagamitin natin yung definitions ni sine at cosine. And we are going to substitute it to our unit circle. So we end up with cosine theta squared plus sine theta squared equals 1. Now, pwedeng ganyan yung pagkakasulat. Tatanggapin ko to. And I'm going to also accept this one. Yang dalawang yan, that means the same. Etong part na to, at etong equation na to. Pero ang mathematicians, mas madalas na ginagamit ang equation na ito. If you're going to square sine theta, usually nilalagay yung exponent sa gitna. That implies na yung buong sine theta yung ini-square mo at hindi yung theta lang. Klaruhin natin ha. Lagay ko dito. Remember, yung sine theta squared ninyo ay hindi equal sa sine squared theta. May mga nagkakamali kasi dyan, so I want to emphasize this. Magkaiba po ang ibig sabihin yan. Okay, balik tayo. So we have cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta equals 1. Pagbabalik na rin lang natin si sine at cosine. So we have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. This is because we have the commutative property. Basta addition, pwede mong pagbalik-balik na rin yung order niyan. So this is now our first Pythagorean identity. Now, para makuha natin yung pangalawa, we simply divide both sides by sine squared theta. So dividing both sides by sine squared theta, we end up with, simplify ito, this is equal to 1. Cosine squared over sine squared, ratio identity yan. Si cosine squared, cosine over sine, that is cotangent. Remember, may squared. So, dapat may squared din yan. Etong 1 over sine squared, this is reciprocal. Anong reciprocal ng sine? Cosecant. So, 1 over sine squared magiging cosecant squared theta. And that is now our second identity. That's 1 plus cotangent squared theta equals cosecant squared theta. Now, let us continue. Balikan natin yung sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. Kanina, dinivide natin both sides by sine squared theta. I-divide natin ngayon by cosine squared theta. So, let us take a look at each part. We have sine squared theta divided by cosine squared theta. Kung babalikan natin yung ratio identity, we have sine over cosine. Ratio identity yan, that is equal to tangent squared theta. Yung sunod naman, we have cosine squared theta over cosine squared theta. Pareho si numerator tsaka si denominator, magde-divide silang dalawa. Ang sagot ay 1. Doon tayo sa kabilang side. We have 1 over cosine squared theta. Since 1 over cosine squared theta, reciprocal identity yan. Anong reciprocal identity na equal sa 1 over cosine squared theta? That is secant squared theta. So, ang final identity natin is tangent squared theta plus 1 equals secant squared theta. So, those are your Pythagorean identities. Now, tandaan, hindi porket ganyan ang ayos ng identity mo, ay yan lang ang identity na pwede. Remember na pwede nating kalikutin yung identity. Which means, na pwede rin gamiting identity si tangent squared theta equals secant squared theta minus 1. So, ano nangyari dito? Yung 1 sa left side, nilipat natin sa kabila. Paano natin nilipat sa kabilang side? We subtract 1 from both sides of the equation. So, that's positive 1 minus 1, kaya nawala na siya. Secant squared theta minus 1, kaya nagkaroon ka ng minus 1 sa right side. So, that's tangent squared theta equals secant squared theta minus 1. Let's have another example. Let's make use of our identity here, kanina. So we have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. Now, if you want na si sine lang matira sa isang side, pwede natin tanggalin si cosine squared sa left side, ililipat natin sa kanan. So we are going to subtract cosine squared theta on both sides para mabuo natin ang identity na sine squared theta equals 1 minus cosine squared theta. Galing sa isang identity, nag-manipulate lang tayo, kaya mag-a-apply pa rin yan. So that concludes the first part of our second module on the fundamental trigonometric identities. Kung may tanong kayo, mangyaring mag-send lang ng PM or private message sa inyong basic calculus teachers. This is Mr. De Los Santos. Kita-kita tayo sa part 2 for examples on simplifying trigonometric expressions.
Happy learning at home with lessons made easy by Olivarian GoTeach. One proud Olivarian.